Well, good morning. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy. And it's Monday morning, start of a new week. And we are going to be finishing up. Well, we finished up the church hearings on Saturday. And as you know, whenever we finish up an investigation, I go back over that period of time and look at the suspicious, violent, unexplained deaths that happened that no matter which investigation you're talking about, always seem to point back to 1963. So we are looking at the period today of approximately 1975. I kept it mainly to 1975, but as you can see in this graph, uh, the graph pulls in from 74 to 76. I stayed to 75 because that's the year of the church hearings. It didn't uh, cover multiple years. So the question is, and it's always the same question in these culture of death episodes. If the FBI/CIA were not rogue, why the collateral damage during the church hearings? Where we left off Saturday was the church hearings have produced documents given to the committee by Colby and Schlesinger, the two directors of the CIA who gave up the documents and are noteworthy for that alone. We've learned that the American people have learned that the FBI was involved in basically acting as a secret police here internally in the United States, harassing, using violence, setting people up, using provocateurs and violence and infiltrators. I mean, it goes on, illegal surveillance, and up to and including assassination. And we highlighted two in particular, Fred Hampton and Martin Luther King, both of whom were assassinated by the FBI. So it's clear the FBI has gone rogue, and we've already established that anyway, because in the Warren Commission, J. Edgar Hoover made a decision right off the bat that Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy, and only gave the evidence that supported that conclusion to the Warren Commission, who then reported in the Warren report exactly what J. Edgar Hoover reported the day after the assassination. In other words, it wasn't a legitimate investigation. The FBI rigged it. We also learned that the CIA was rogue. And we kind of already knew that, but as evidence from their internal documents, we found out that there had been a multiplicity of covert actions the CIA had been involved in. These are some that Nixon didn't want revealed, as evidenced by his words on the tape. These very sensitive covert projects. We learned about the operation to bring Nazi scientists and doctors and physicists and generals, whomever was of particular usefulness to us. We snuck them into the United States, and then from their scientists and their doctors, we began a program of torture and using hypnosis and drugs. First, Operation Bluebird in the Korean War to try to get their POWs to say things that were incriminating to North Korea, just like they had done to us. They had drugged up our POWs, and our POWs were going on TV saying things like the Americans were using biological and chemical weapons against North Korea. Turns out we were, but we didn't want that secret exposed. So we were trying to do research on North Korean POWs to figure out how to teach our soldiers how to resist the drugs, how to resist the hypnosis, so that they wouldn't be uh, able to so-called propagandize the American people with words put in their mouth by North Koreans if they were taken captive. That was the excuse, the pretext for our research. After the the Korean War, we found another pool of unwitting subjects upon which we could conduct our research. And that was the South Vietnamese civilian population, the non-combatants, the people that we suspected were collaborating with the NILF or the Viet Cong. And so in order to get them to give up information or to confess or to give us other information we wanted about the war effort, we tortured them and killed approximately 40,000 non-combatant South Vietnamese citizens. It's kind of surprising to me, knowing that it was surprising to us that the South Vietnamese ever turned against us in that war, considering we were killing their peasants, such a clip. And then we learned about Operation Mockingbird. And that was in a previous episode about the CIA's infiltration of the United States media. I gave you a few media personalities, media companies, and how important it was that the CIA's propaganda become the official news story. And then lastly, Saturday, we talked about Operation MK Ultra and how once the Korean War was over and the Vietnam War was over, we didn't have a pool of unwitting subjects upon which we could conduct our research, continue to conduct our research. And so Alan Dulles brought the program home, made it domestic. Technically, CIA is supposed to only operate on foreign soil, but here they were operating domestically. And this time, their pool of unwitting subjects came from prisons as inmates. They came from hospitals as patients. They came from universities as students. Another group I neglected to mention on Saturday was servicemen. There's some evidence that the MK Ultra program also used servicemen who were enlistees in the military in the four branches. We also conducted tests on them as well. And that's less known, and but it did happen. So those are the four pools from which we drew. Of course, we talked about how Alan Dulles, when he set it up with Sidney Gottlieb, spread it out all across the country amongst 44 universities, a bunch of different hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, prisons, et cetera, so that no prying eyes could figure out the entire equation, what was going on. And this compartmentalization was similar to how we operated Manhattan Project, try to keep the players apart so no one figured out entirely what they were doing. And I gave you some examples of individuals who were affected by this project and went off the rails and became violent criminals themselves. And of course, the public was not aware of what snapped in their brain that caused them to become violent criminals. So, and there are many others, folks. In fact, this program, it is documented that the United States government has had to pay out several large settlements to families who sued and said that we sent our young daughter or son away to college, and you recruited him into this program, and you broke his brain, you bent his mind, you destroyed his life. And they sued, and the government had to pay. They lost all those lawsuits. So this is not just an isolated case. This was, and it wasn't a case where he said versus she said. It was proven in court and well documented. So that's what our CIA was up to. The upshot of that is that we now know that the CIA, which was supposed to be working on foreign soil, is now operating domestically. Another thing that came out as a result of Family Jewels was that they had a program called Executive Action, where they were trying to remove foreign heads of state, mostly in South and Latin America, on friendlies. I mean, they could be anybody who was just not acting in the interests of America. They were acting in the interest of their own country. We considered them unfriendly. And that's how we assassinated Patrice Lumumba, Ngo Diem of Vietnam. Patrice Lumumba was from the Congo. Rene Schneider of Chile, and all the 600 some odd attempts we made on Castro's life. Um, and within that program of executive action was a means by which we accomplished it. It's called TWEP, termination with extreme prejudice, which is the act of killing off somebody, or doing it in such a way that their body is left in such an unnatural state or unidentifiable state that an autopsy cannot figure out the cause of death. Or, and this is more interesting to me, an autopsy will reveal that the person died of natural causes, i.e., a disease like cancer or a heart ailment. And so here's the calculation I want you to think about as we begin today, and how it relates back to JFK and what the church members are thinking about. Okay, the CIA is not supposed to be acting domestically. We now have proof from their own documents that it is. The CIA, it is against the law. We are not supposed to be assassinating foreign heads of state. We now have proof from their own documents that the CIA has been engaged in such behavior. So if you take those two things alone, within the context of the JFK assassination of 63, within the context of two more assassinations in 68, MLK and RFK, you have to ask the question, especially when you realize, as a result of the Schweiker report, which was a subcommittee of the church report, that said that the Warren Commission was rigged from the start, that the CIA hid all kinds of information, as did the FBI. The Warren commissioners did not have access to all the facts, and that Oswald was connected to people like David Ferrie and Jack Ruby and all. You start to put all that together, you start to ask the question, might the CIA, which was actively trying to hide information from the Warren Commission, might the CIA have had a role in killing our own president? I mean, in the past, they would say, of course not. We only operate on foreign soil, but now we know they don't. In the past, they would say, no, of course not, because assassination is against the law. But now we know they have been. And in the past, they might say, well, no, of course not, because the Warren Commission ruled it was Lee Harvey Oswald who acted alone. Well, now we know that the CIA, through Alan Dulles and with the help of the FBI, hid a bunch of incriminating evidence that led back to its own agency and its role in the assassination. So if you're a church committee member and you now know all this, you have your suspicions that your own government killed its own president, which is what's going to lead to the next investigation, number 5, starting tomorrow. That's why the House Select Committee is going to come into existence, because of the lingering suspicions from the church hearings. And so these deaths we're going to talk about today, and here's another thing, when all of these people keep turning up dead, these witnesses that are important, that's one of the things that the church committee is going to notice. Look who we called to testify about these issues, about JFK, because Schweiker was given the responsibility to look specifically into the death of JFK and see if the CIA has been hiding all this other stuff from us, what else did they hide from the Warren Commission that might have implicated itself? And Schweiker came back and said a lot, and recommended a further look to the JFK assassination. But every time he named a witness, the witness came up dead. We're going to look at a couple of those today. So I've been asked, the reason I went into this long intro is because I've been asked several times, okay, we stipulate the FBI was rogue, the CIA was rogue. What's it got to do with the JFK assassination 12 years earlier? Well, let's look at some of these people that turn up dead in the year 1975 that tie all the way back to 1963. Roger Craig, pictured here on the left, that's a red arrow. That is right outside. He's standing outside the Texas School Book Depository. Of course, this photo was taken on the 22nd of November 1963, right after JFK was assassinated. He was a sheriff's deputy in Dallas, and he was informed by his boss, the sheriff, that he had no official duties on that day, which he thought was unusual. Nevertheless, he hung around. He's in the crowd as a spectator, standing in front of the sheriff's department. I'm going to show you a map here in just a second where the sheriff's building was on Dealey Plaza. So he was a witness to everything because he was standing on that in Dealey Plaza, in front of the sheriff's department building. After the shots, Roger Craig joined the crowd as a crowd was running towards the grassy knoll. We've established that in earlier episodes, how the witnesses pointed in the direction of the grassy knoll and began running in that direction. Several cops did as well. Roger Craig, along with others from that crowd, encountered a man behind the picket fence who stated he was a Secret Service agent and produced credentials. When we get to the conspirators, and of course the Secret Service is one of my conspirators, we'll go into depth about all these people in Dealey Plaza who are flashing Secret Service credentials that day. Even though, according to the Secret Service roster, its own internal documents, all the Secret Service agents were in the actual motorcade. They were not on foot. They were in the motorcade. So somebody was impersonating Secret Service agents, and Roger Craig ran into one of them. Tells that story. Okay, here's the map. I've drawn a red circle around the criminal building where they house the Dallas Sheriff's Department. And so you can see where he was standing. So the arrows here represent the path of the motorcade. So the motorcade went right in front of him. And then after that right hand, that 90-degree turn from Maine onto Houston. And then he's standing there looking out over across at the grassy knoll, as you can see. And after the motorcade makes that 110-degree turn from Houston onto Elm, he's staring through that grassy area there in the middle, a little plaza. And when the shooting begins, he's staring right at the grassy knoll. So he's got a pretty good perspective. He's not as close as some, but he's also a sheriff's deputy, so he's trained in these sorts of things. He knows what to look for, and he certainly can hear everything. Dealey Plaza is not very big. It's a pretty small place. The arrow represents the direction which he ran, in the direction of that fence, which is on the grassy knoll. Behind those little trees there, those little circles represent trees. That's where the smoke came from. That's where the shot came from. That's where everybody's running, and he as well. So, not sure why I have two faces this morning. It's interesting. But so I guess you get me twice. Arnold and Barbara Rowland. Arnold is pictured here, top right. That is a copy of his deposition or his statement that he gives to the police. Roger Craig interviewed these two people. I'm assuming they're husband and wife, and interviewed these two moments after the shots. And according to the Rowlands, they're pointing up at the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository where they said they saw two men, one of whom held a rifle with a telescopic sight on it. So Roger Craig bumps into these two. They're pointing up, saying, remember now, Roger Craig has run over to the grassy knoll where he encountered a Secret Service man with a badge. Then he bumps into the Rowlands, and the Rowlands say, well, we saw two men up on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. One of them had a rifle with a scope. So Craig heads back to the Texas School Book Depository. And he says he entered the Texas School Book Depository along with several other sheriff's deputies, and they begin searching. And he gets to the 6th floor, which is where he was headed because of what the Rollins told him. And that's when they discovered the rifle stashed behind the boxes. He said he was 8 feet away when the rifle was discovered. He saw the 2 officers pick it up and look at it and identify it as a German Mauser. And Craig, who was only 8 feet away, said he also identified it as a German Mauser, caliber 7.65. So now we have a third witness to that rifle being discovered on a Texas School Book Depository as a German Mauser, not a Mannlicher Carcano. But there's more. Captain Will Fritz called a weapons expert named Seymour Weitzman to the scene. Says, "What is this?" And Seymour Weitzman also confirmed it as a 7.65 German Mauser bolt action. It had a scope and a brown leather sling. We now have 4 experts. Okay, these are not people who work at the Texas School Book Depository. These are not guys who move boxes around. Okay, these are sheriff's deputies or Dallas police, or in Seymour Weitzman's case, in the words of his captain, a weapons expert. And they've all identified this as a German Mauser caliber 7.65. There was documentation of the first 2 because they had to record what they found and enter it into evidence. And so there's documentation that they label it or identify it as a German Mauser. The other 2, Seymour Weitzman and Roger Craig wasn't even on duty, as we've learned, but he identified it. And Seymour Weitzman came over and identified it verbally. And Captain Will Fritz was there. So I don't know if Captain Will Fritz actually saw it, but I'm assuming he did because he called Seymour Weitzman to the scene, says, "Come over here and tell us what this is." So whether or not he was actually one of the witnesses, I don't know, but we know we have 4. And there is no way, we've learned this before, that you can confuse a German Mauser with a Mannlicher Carcano. It can't be done. So then Craig leaves the building and he's kind of just hanging around. There's a picture of him on the far left there. That's Roger Craig standing there. And he's just watching all the action and testifies later that he saw Lee Harvey Oswald 15 minutes after the shooting walk from behind the Texas School Book Depository and enter a light-colored Nash Rambler station wagon. Later, when he's asked to identify Oswald after Oswald's been arrested, Craig makes an appearance at Oswald's interrogation and says, "Yeah, that's the guy I saw." Now, this is a problem because according to the Warren Commission, according to the FBI, Oswald's fleeing the scene at this time and getting ready to shoot a cop across town. But here is Roger Craig saying, "No, no, no, I saw him. I saw him. He was walking. He got in that Nash Rambler station wagon," which he later identified and said it was driven by a Latin-looking fella. And there were 2 Latins in the car, he said. So he didn't just identify Oswald, he identified the driver and another passenger. There are 3 big problems that Roger Craig presents. I'm moving 2 faces around. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know why there's 2 faces. Normally there's one. As I've done 60 of these videos, there's always been 1 face. But today there's 2. 3 big problems. The Rowland testimony obviously contradicts the official lone assassin narrative because they said they saw 2 people in the window, 1 with a gun, but 2 people standing there, probably 1 acting as a spotter. All right, that's a problem. And of course, Roger Craig is the one who took their statement. So they're both a problem because now Roger knows what they said. The second problem is the German Mauser does not fit with what the narrative is, that the Oswald rifle was the Mannlicher Carcano. Okay, you got a problem there. And then thirdly, the Oswald sighting by Craig 15 minutes after the shooting destroys the whole timeline, which is already problematic, which is why they had to We learned in an earlier episode, they had to move the J.D. Tippit time to make it possible for Oswald to walk a mile from his rooming house. So the timeline's already messed up, but this is going to destroy it. If he's cited 15 minutes after the shooting at the Texas School Book Depository, when he should have been across town getting ready to shoot Officer J.D. Tippit, that complicates things because well, for obvious reasons. So Will Fritz, and who is the guy who called Seymour Weitzman over to identify the rifle, Will Fritz has to do some quick cleanup work on Isle Roger. And you see Roger Craig is pictured there in the hallway of the Dallas police. And in the office, he's actually in an office, and it's Captain Will Fritz's office on the evening of November 22nd, 1963. Fritz publicly denies that Craig had been there that night until this photo showed up years later. So when Craig begins telling his story, his captain, Captain Will Fritz, denies it. Says, no, Roger wasn't there. I don't know what he's saying. I don't know what he's talking about. He wasn't there. And would have gotten away with it, except this photo existed and popped up. And there he is, standing there talking in Dallas Police Headquarters to other Dallas Police and Sheriff's personnel. So now all of a sudden we got a problem because Roger Craig was there. And Roger Craig is saying some inconvenient things. It's not going along with the narrative. So he gets fired. In 1967, he keeps, Roger won't let it go. In subsequent interviews and things of that nature, as you got to learn about Roger Craig, witnesses all said he was a persistent fella, and he would not let this go. The narrative, and of course, by 67, the Warren Commission has come out with a report. It's 3 years old by this point. And Roger keeps saying, well, he said, there's problems with this. I saw Oswald here 15 minutes. That whole thing about J.D. Tippit can't happen. I saw the rifle. It was a Mauser. It wasn't a Mannlicher Carcano. He won't let it go. So in 67, he gets fired from the sheriff's department. Jim Garrison gets a hold of him. And, it's 67. So we're getting close to the Garrison trial in New Orleans. So he asks Craig to come testify at the Clay Shaw trial, during which he gets shot at and a sniper's bullet grazes his head. He barely survives an attempt on his life during the Clay Shaw trial. So you remember now, in the context of the Clay Shaw trial, all those witnesses that turned up dead, because the defense knew in advance who was going to get called. And so every time Garrison turned around, he lost Deladio and David Ferry, his 2-star witnesses, on the same day. He almost lost Roger Craig. So then he gets asked later to testify in a congressional investigation, which the only congressional investigation between 67 and 75, when he dies, is the church hearings. So he gets asked to testify at the church. He gets shot at again. And he survives again. Later, a bomb is planted in his car, explodes, and somehow he survives a bomb blast. Later, his car is forced off the road, and he's involved in a car wreck, and he breaks his back. And he ends up in the hospital for a year, laid up in the hospital in traction, as he was forced off the road by another car, rolled his vehicle, broke his back, and almost died. So this guy is a problem. And not only is it a problem because of what he knows and what he can testify and what he's willing to testify to, he's a problem because he won't die. He has literally survived 4 attempts on his life, and he's been fired. Okay, this doesn't happen to somebody who doesn't, who doesn't witness anything, or doesn't have anything that might violate or, you know, contradict the narrative, the official narrative. This is what happens to people who have stories to tell that powerful people don't want those stories told. Anyway, on May 15th, 1975, he's finally shot to death with a rifle. Of course, they ruled the death a suicide, though, according to his wife, he had never owned a rifle. So you talk about a victim, someone who paid a high price. He says so himself while he's still alive. He says, quote, "If you pursue the assassination and its aftermath, be sure you are willing to pay the full price." And nobody understood what that full price entailed more than Roger Craig. So during those church hearings, uh, May 15th, 1975, Craig is shot to death with a rifle. How about Sam Giancana? This is the one that Schweiker is going to point to. This is one of them anyway. It's going to point to saying, hey, something's up here, something's amiss, and we need to look into this further, the JFK assassination, because we just called this guy to testify, and look what happened. And he was literally scheduled to testify at the church committee the day after he was found murdered. It's a picture of his body after he was found in his basement kitchen. Sam Giancana, boss of the Chicago outfit since 1957. And boy, he has been everywhere where there's been any hint of impropriety or any hint of conspiracy related to the JFK assassination. If you remember, we've covered in an earlier episode that he was one of those members at the Fontainebleau meeting when Nixon had wanted to put together a assassination team to kill Castro. And you remember he initially went to Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes went to his attorney, Robert Mayhew. Robert Mayhew went to Johnny Roselli, the guy who could put him in contact with the mafia boss. Johnny Roselli brought Sam Giancana in. Sam Giancana brought Santos Trafficante in. And they all met. And Santos said, remember, I need a Nixon representative here to prove this is from Nixon. So the next meeting, Sheffield Edwards showed up, and it's the same people. It's Santos Trafficante, it's Sam Giancana, it's Johnny Roselli, it's Sheffield Edwards, it's Robert Mayhew, and they're all putting together this S-force to. So Sam's involved in that. We're going to learn later about a secret deal Sam Giancana had made with John F. Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, to help him win the election in 1960. This all happened in a courtroom in Chicago, Judge Tuohy's courtroom, back in his chambers, actually, a secret meeting between Sam and Joe. And they went way back from Joe's time selling during Prohibition, selling Canadian whiskey, and doing so with the blessing of organized crime. He was actually working together with Frank Costello and all the organized crime figures. So they were partners. That's how the Kennedys made all their money, by the way. And so he's going back to some partners that he'd had in years past to help his son get elected. He knew it was going to be a close election. We'll talk a lot about this later, but the basic was going to come down to winning the primary. There was a couple earlier states. He was going to need help winning the Democrat primary, specifically in West Virginia. The problem was he was a Catholic, and we hadn't voted for Catholics for president. We were afraid the Pope would run the country. So he needed help with that. And some of these state primaries, especially early on, were hostile to Catholics, West Virginia being one of them. So he needed mafia help. Of course, mafia and organized labor, organized crime and organized labor are like two heads of the same coin. So if you could get the mafia on your side, you're going to get labor on your side. And labor unions control West Virginia, all the coal miners. So it was going to help him win the primary in West Virginia. It was also going to help him win the general. He had to win the state of Illinois. And you win the city of Chicago, you win the state. And the state of Illinois was the key state in the 1960 election. And Sam, of course, headquarters are in Chicago. And so he is perfectly situated to help Kennedy win in 1960. But the deal was, if I help your son win, I want a friend in the White House. The McClellan Committee, the Rackets Committee, led by Bobby and JFK when he was a senator, have been just raking organized crime over the coals. We need that to go away. We need a friendly in the White House. And Joe Kennedy says, well, if you help get my son elected, you'll have a friendly in the White House. We also need back into Cuba. Well, if you elect my son, he's going to overthrow Castro and get you guys back into Cuba, set you back up in business, et cetera, et cetera. So now that he's been elected, he has to come through with that deal. Okay. So Sam is privy to all that information about how JFK became president to begin with. They also shared a girlfriend during this period. This is part of JFK's scandalous, reckless personal behavior, but this was all a setup by Sam. Sam had his, he knew JFK's proclivities when it came to women. So he invited him to a big party, and his girlfriend, Judith Campbell, was there, and he introduced him. And according to witnesses, JFK and Judith Campbell spent the entire weekend upstairs in the hotel room and were never seen again for like the next 2 or 3 days. And from that point forward, Judith Campbell went back and forth between JFK and Sam, and she became one of their intermediaries. That's how they shared information. She would take messages from Sam to JFK. JFK would take messages or give messages to Judith, and she'd take them back to Sam. Sometimes money was exchanged. She was the intermediary. She was the mule. She was also the shared girlfriend. And that's how Sam had blackmail leverage on JFK. She wasn't the only intermediary. There was another intermediary that you might be familiar with. His name was Frank Sinatra. We'll cover all that later. But so Sam is intimately aware of all the goings on when it comes to Kennedy stuff. He also participated in a joint CIA mafia operation to assassinate JFK. We now know that his number two, basically Johnny Roselli, was in Dallas that day. We also know that Sam was there. Sam was on the scene. Johnny Roselli was there. Johnny Roselli was actually in one of the buildings. He was in the Caltex building, serving as a lookout or a spotter for Charles Nicoletti. And Charles Nicoletti was an assassin in Sam Giancana's outfit in Chicago. Also, according to James Files, if you believe him, he was on the grassy knoll, and he was the grassy knoll shooter. And he was actually there on the orders of Charles Nicoletti. James Files was a soldier, an assassin, and he had those special skills that he'd learned in Vietnam. He was there on orders of Charles Nicoletti, and he was to be the shooter that wasn't supposed to shoot unless JFK had not been hit in the head by the time the car got to the grassy knoll area. And of course, he hadn't, so he had to take the shot. Those of you that dismiss James Files, just remember that he is the only person who has been able to identify the mercury round that he fired at JFK's head that went through his brain, and then afterwards took the spent shell casing, sucked on it with his mouth as he was putting his gun away, bit down on it. That was his trademark. That's what he always did. He bit down on it and left the shell casing perched on the fence. And years later, he told that story. And sure enough, somebody went up on that grassy knoll with a metal detector and searched, and they found buried in the ground 2 or 3 inches beneath the top of the soil, they found a shell casing with teeth marks on it. And they had it tested and retested and looked at by a dental expert at the University of Texas. And he determined that those were teeth marks in that mercury round. Another little interesting observation is you remember now JFK, according to the Warren Commission, the president's brain was lost they had a draw. They had some drawings of it, but they didn't have the actual brain. And they said, when Garrison went looking for it in '67, the National Archives says, "What's lost? I don't know where it is." And this is a key piece of evidence that would tell the track of the bullet. It would also be able to confirm if there was mercury, and because mercury doesn't go away, mercury stays there for a long, long time, and you'd be able to pretty easily detect by looking at the president's brain if he was shot with a mercury round. But his brain went missing. There's a lot of suspicion that the reason his brain went missing is because A, the track of the bullet showed that the shot came from the front and the right, which is the grassy knoll, and B, there were traces of mercury. And that would not jive. Any of that would not, none of that would jive with a shot from behind from a Mannlicher Carcano. And of course, we also learned that it was a frangible bullet, and that doesn't jive with a shot from behind from a full metal jacket bullet from a Mannlicher Carcano by Lee Harvey Oswald. None of that did, so the brain had to disappear. So, but there's a lot of corroborating evidence there anyway, the point of all that is to tell you that the Chicago family was there. Sam Giancana was there. His number two was there. Charles Nicoletti, his one of his preferred assassins was there, and Charles Nicoletti's soldier James Files was there. So a lot of Chicago was in Dallas on November 22, 1963. We know Johnny Roselli was there because Tosh Plumlee testified to it later. He flew him in. And anyway, on June 19th, 1975, Sam Giancana is scheduled to testify the following day on the 20th. But before he could testify, he's found murdered in his kitchen while cooking peppers and sausage. He was shot 7 times in the neck and the mouth. That's a mafia hit, and it's to send a message that whoever the victim is a talker. He's a rat. Sometimes they would actually stick a rat in their mouth, their dead mouth. But in this case, they shot him in the mouth and the neck. So this is one of the things that alerted the church committee to a connection here. He was being called in not to talk about the CIA going rogue or the FBI going rogue or intelligence community abuses. He was being called in as part of the Schweiker subcommittee to talk about the JFK assassination, and that's why he was killed. At least that's what their view was. And so they point to that killing, that murder of Sam Giancana as further evidence that this needs to be looked at again. Then we get the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. You say, well, what's Jimmy Hoffa got to do with all this? Well, we obviously know he was the president of the Teamsters Union. He was in 1960, quite a significant contributor financially to Richard Nixon's campaign. He was not a Kennedy fan at all. In fact, he and Carlos Marcello each made $500,000 contributions to Nixon's campaign, $1 million between the two of them. And then he lost. And Bobby Kennedy, who has been going after organized crime and the Teamsters, he's already put away Jimmy Hoffa's boss, Dave Beck. He already got him. That's how Jimmy Hoffa became the president. Now he's going after Hoffa. And now he has more motive to go after Hoffa because Hoffa supports Nixon, gave him a bunch of money. So through the course of a long investigation, Bobby indicts Hoffa for misappropriating union pension funds and giving money to organized crime to help build Las Vegas. Charges him with fraud and tax issues and things of that nature. The trial goes through several dispensations. There's a hung jury in one of them. Eventually, right here, not too far from where I live in Nashville, Tennessee, in 1964, he's convicted by a jury and sentenced to 8 years in prison. And this is after one of these close Teamster officials whom he trusted, E.G. Parton, who was facing his own legal jeopardy. This is how they get you to flip. He was facing kidnapping charges, murder charges, robbery, rape. He's going to be going away for a long time unless he makes a deal with Bobby, which he did. So he cooperates with federal prosecutors and testifies against Hoffa, which almost never happened. That's what it took to put him away. So he goes to jail. Here's a picture, top right, of him. Now, this is when he's getting out. I think I had a picture on the previous slide of him. Let me see if I do. Yeah, here he is entering jail. So this picture on the top right, I think, symbolizes Jimmy Hoffa and the relationship he had with Bobby Kennedy. This predates the 1960 election. He's testifying at the McClellan Committee, and Bobby is giving him a third degree. And Jimmy was just a hard ass. I don't know any other way to say it. He was just a hard ass. You couldn't get anything out of him. He was contemptuous. He was sarcastic. He gave it to Bobby, and Bobby gave it back to him. They were like cut from the same cloth. They had a very antagonistic relationship. It's kind of interesting. They actually grew to have a little bit of a grudging respect for each other because they were both wired similarly. But here is Jimmy Hoffa. I always tell my class when we get to this, communicating non-verbally to the committee and to Bobby in particular. So fast forward to December 1971 now, and Nixon is now the president. And Nixon, remember now, Hoffa was a big contributor to Nixon. And so Nixon orders Hoffa's release. He gives him clemency or a pardon. Later, it's discovered that, of course, Nixon had received illegal campaign donations from the Teamsters Union in exchange for this pardon. Okay, that's going to come out during Watergate, all that money that was being contributed. I'm sure there was some extortion, probably by John Mitchell involved. You want that pardon, you got to give a big contribution. So they did. The condition of his pardon was that he participate in the union no more. He's done, his union days are over. Okay. He needs to just become a private citizen and become a quietly retired private citizen. That's what they wanted him to be. Well, that's just not how Hoff was wired. He was blue collar through and through. He was a worker, and he wanted to get back in the game. And so he attempts to return as leader of the Teamsters Union, and this angers people above him. The folks who arranged his pardon were these mafia bosses that controlled the Teamsters Union. I mean, the Teamsters Union had a boss, but they were so intricately connected with organized crime and organized labor. It was hard to see when one began and the other ended. They were like one organization. In fact, organized labor used the Teamsters pension fund as their own personal piggy bank, and they were allowed to do that. So anyway, he angers these people who sort of finagled this deal on his behalf. And so on July 30, 1975, he just disappears. He's in Detroit. He's going to a restaurant meetup with a local crime boss, and he just disappears at night. And on July 30, 1975, I've got I thought I had a picture of the restaurant. He was going to a meetup at the Red Fox restaurant, and there's a good movie out. Jack Nicholson plays the part of Jimmy Hoffa. But anyway, he just disappears, never to be heard from, seen from again. And in 82, the government officially declares him presumed dead. So 7 years later, but he disappeared on July 30, 1975. According to Frank Sharon, who wrote the book, They Say You Paint Houses, he says he actually was the guy who killed Jimmy Hoffa, acting on instructions of his bosses, and that they cremated his body. So all these searches for Jimmy Hoffa, I've heard so many different places. I remember when I was living in Michigan, one time there was a big deal where they were digging up area where it used to be a dump. They were looking for his body. Another time they were digging up a driveway. There was a rumor that he was buried in the end zone at the Meadowlands football stadium in New Jersey. They searched. Now there's no body. Okay, according to Frank Sharon, they cremated his body, and that's why they'll never find it. They've never found it and never will find it. I don't know if that's true or not. Other people say different things, but they have never found the body. So that brings us to the time period afterwards, where we start learning some things about Jimmy Hoffa. On January 14th, 1992, the New York Post claimed that Hoffa, Santos Trafficante, and Carlos Marcello had all been involved in the assassination of JFK. Well, we knew about Trafficante and Marcello. Hoffa's a new name in this, right? According to mob lawyer Frank Logano, now I've got a picture here on the right. He's the guy in the red circle, and you see he's at a dinner. Santos Trafficante is immediately to Frank Logano's left. Carlos Marcello is immediately to Santos's left, and you can't see who's pictured on the other side. But Frank Logano was known as the mob lawyer. In fact, he wrote a book called Mob Lawyer. He represented all these guys. And he was quoted as saying in this New York Post article that at the beginning of 63, Hoffa had told him to take a message to Trafficante and Marcello concerning a plan to kill Kennedy. He says, when the meeting took place at the Royal Orleans Hotel, which is in New Orleans, Regano told the men, quote, "You won't believe what Hoffa wants me to tell you. Jimmy wants you to kill the president." And according to Regano, both men gave the impression that they would do this. They were, Frank Regano represented Santos and Carlos at different points, but he also represented Jimmy Hoffa. This is when Hoffa, he's communicating a message. He's using Frank Regano as his message person. Go back and tell Santos this, go back and tell Carlos this. So he writes this book in 1994. That was the New York Post article. In 94, 2 years later, Regano writes a book called Mob Lawyer, and he adds a little bit more context to this. He says that in July 63, he was once again sent to New Orleans by Hoffa to meet Santos Trafficante and Carlos Marcello concerning plans to kill JFK. When Kennedy was killed, Hoffa apparently said to Regano, quote, "I told you they could do it. I'll never forget what Carlos and Santos did for me." He added, "This means Bobby is out as Attorney General." Marcello later told Regano, quote, "When you see Jimmy, you tell him he owes me, and he owes me big." So, wow, people ask, well, what's Hoffa got to do with all? Hoffa was he was an avowed enemy of Bobby Kennedy in particular, because Bobby's the one going after him as the Teamsters boss. Bobby's the one put him in jail. And Bobby is going to be a continuing problem when he gets out, if and when he gets out. And so he wants Bobby taken out, but he realizes, as do these mafia bosses, if you take out Bobby but not JFK, JFK is going to move heaven and earth to avenge his brother's death. But if you take out the president, Bobby ceases to be a problem. When we get to the conspirators, I'm going to give you some direct quotes coming from FBI wiretaps, where Carlos Marcello flat out says that in so many words. He says, you take out Bobby, he's the tail of the dog, but you take out the head and the tail ceases to be a problem. So you see what their strategy is. You take out JFK and Bobby is no longer a problem. So that's the story of Jimmy Hoffa, again, in 1975. How about Johnny Roselli, which I did reach into 76 to get Johnny Roselli, because, boy, is he intricately involved in all of these same cast of characters. They called him Handsome Johnny. He's been involved in organized crime since the 20s, and he has become the liaison from the Chicago family to Las Vegas. When they moved and started their operations out in Las Vegas, the Chicago family needed somebody they could trust out there to oversee their operations. And so Johnny Roselli was sent out there to do that. That is why when Nixon goes to Howard Hughes lived in Las Vegas. Howard Hughes went to his attorney, Robert Mayhew. Robert Mayhew knew whom he could go speak with. Johnny Roselli lived right there in Las Vegas, and that would put him in contact with Sam Giancana. So that's Johnny Roselli as a liaison to a lot of different parties that need to get connected. He's a liaison between the CIA and organized crime. He's a liaison between people like Howard Hughes and Sam Giancana. He's a liaison in a lot of different ways. He puts people together, which is how that Fontainebleau meeting happens in the 60s. And of course, he was there. We also know because of Tosh Plumlee, because of James Files, because of Charles Nicoletti, and because of other witnesses, we know that he was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. We know that. And he had already testified the year before he died to the church committee in 75 that, quote, a CIA hit team had been dispatched to Cuba to hit Castro, had been turned and used to kill Kennedy instead. That's the S-Force. He's talking about the S-Force. That's the story I've told you. And he's telling the church committee the same thing. He's saying it wasn't a mafia hit team, it was a CIA hit team. And they want to learn more. So they recall him to testify again the following year, which is 76. But before he can show up to testify, something's going to happen. He had also given an interview to Jack Anderson, the same Washington Post reporter we've talked about a lot during Watergate. And he tells Jack Anderson, quote, when Oswald was picked up, the underworld conspirators feared he would crack and disclose information that might lead to them. You know, he already told him he was a patsy. So they knew he was going to talk. This almost certainly would have brought a massive U.S. crackdown on the mafia. So Jack Ruby was ordered to eliminate Oswald. So what we have here, Johnny Roselli lived after, he was in Dallas in 63, but he lived to 76 because he didn't talk. Well, all of a sudden in 75, he starts to talk. And that's when he ran into problems. He talked to the church committee. It's in their documents what he said. He talked to Jack Anderson. Jack Anderson reported what he said. So on August 9th, 1976, before he could talk anymore, he disappears. And they find his body floating in an oil drum in Dumbfounding Bay down in Miami. He had been shot, garroted, his legs sawn off, and then stuffed into the drum. According to Senator Gary Hart, Roselli was killed, quote, Roselli was killed every way a man could be killed. That they reserve, the organized crime reserves these sort of killings for the rats, for the people who talk. And so you're the church committee now, and two witnesses, very promising witness, Sam Giancana one, Johnny Roselli another, on days either before they were supposed to testify or in the weeks before they were supposed to come up dead. And you know what the subject of that testimony was going to be. It was going to be about JFK. And they've come up dead and violently. And so obviously you're suspicious. An FBI wiretap obtained later by the House Select Committee. Wiretap was on Mafia Don Santos Trafficante. Trafficante said after Roselli's body was found, quote, now only two people know who killed Kennedy, and they aren't talking. And presumably he's talking about himself and Carlos Marcello. In April of 92, Tosh Plumlee, as I've indicated before, of course, he's the S-Force pilot, claimed in an interview that Roselli had been killed, quote, because he knew too much about JM Wave, Operation Mongoose, and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Bottom right, there's a picture of Tosh Plumlee in the cockpit of one of his planes. Top right, picture there on the right is Santos Trafficante. So what do you have here? We have a trail of dead bodies. We went through Roger Craig, whose testimony contradicts the official narrative, attempts on his life 5 times before he's finally killed. It's ruled a suicide. We have, and he did testify to Congress and would have continued to be a problem. So they had to dispose of him. We have Jimmy Hoffa, who disappears in 75. We have Johnny Roselli, who disappears and is found dead. And we have Sam Giancana. These are the movers and shakers. According to Frank Regano, Jimmy Hoffa was involved in the plot to kill Kennedy. According to Frank Regano, so was Santos Trafficante and Carlos Marcello. We've already established that earlier because we know about the S-Force. And Johnny Roselli told Jack Anderson and told the church committee that it was the CIA or this S force that killed JFK and was going back to testify again. But before he can, they kill him. And according to Gary Hart, they kill him just by every which way you can be killed. So, and Johnny Roselli was testifying, or I'm sorry, not Sam Giancana was scheduled to testify. Who knows what Sam would have said? Maybe he didn't say anything. They didn't take any chances. Sam was at that S Force meeting. Johnny was at that S Force meeting. And both of them end up dead. So that's the fallout from the church committee. All those deaths we just talked about happened in 75. Of course, Johnny Roselli happened in 76. But it was a result of what he said to the church committee, what he was going to say in the future. So that's how you can draw a line through all these investigations back to JFK. What does 75 have to do with 63? Well, these deaths we just went through have nothing to do with CIA malfeasance specifically, or FBI going rogue. They have everything to do with what happened in 63 and what these guys know about what happened in 63. And these investigations keep getting a little bit more information out of them about 63. That's what it keeps going back to. And that's why these people keep turning up dead. So, all right, we begin investigation number 5 tomorrow, which is the House Select Committee. And look forward to that. A bunch of new information comes out as a result of all these investigations, and some new evidence emerges. And so some new conclusions will be arrived at. But that's just a little teaser. We'll start that tomorrow. Check out my website, sphistory.com. Give me a thumbs up if you like what you're hearing, if it's interesting to you, and click the notification bell. That way you'll know when new content drops. Everybody, I hope you have a great day. And until tomorrow, everybody enjoy the day. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.